Hi, and welcome to the first episode of Live in the Know. We are excited to be coming to you from the comfort of our own homes. We were going to be doing this in a studio a few weeks from now, but we wanted to bring it to you sooner. We have a lot of pertinent and important information from people within your community that we think will be really helpful to our friends, family, clients, and listeners. So let's get started. We're going to be talking to mortgage brokers. We're going to be talking to attorneys, small businesses, nonprofits, hospitals, doctors, you name it. So we will be sure to bring you all the updated information, whether you're in a real estate transaction or not. All of this information is going to be really helpful. And we hope that we can also provide, a lot of help to people in need with what's going on right now.
So Tracy's right. We are truly in the comfort of our home. So please bear with us, but we really did think this was a perfect time and really important to get this pertinent info out to you, as she said. And what better way to start out with two of the most respected, most reputable real estate attorneys in the industry in the area, with Yitz Magence of Gilmartin Magence and Amy Weil of Kirchman and Weil, who have done a lot of deals with a lot of agents. We've done a lot of deals with them. They're really well-respected people. And they've just got a lot of information in these ever-changing, unique, wild, crazy times. So without further ado, let's have Yitz and Amy help you live in the know.
All right, so we have the great Yitz Magence and the wonderful Amy Weil on board. Thank you both again for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here under the circumstances.
Well, look, we're doing what we can.
Yeah.
Amy, thank you. All right, Yitz, I want to start with you. There are a lot of people out there who have to move and are afraid with everything going on that they're not going to be able to close on their purchase or sell their home. What do you experience in the greater Boston real estate world?
Well, let me start by just generally saying that, frankly, for the most part, I mean, we'll get into more detail, but for the most part, we should assume business as usual. Properties will be able to be sold. Closings will happen under a variety of different circumstances. But everybody should be prepared at this point for sure to figure that they are going to be finishing their transaction as originally planned.
That's great. That's great. We're good. We're happy to hear that. To kind of go into a little bit more detail, Amy, we know that there's been, some changes and some language that needs to be added to the purchase and sale due to the coronavirus. Can you just explain to our listeners, what is being added and how it affects them?
Certainly, Tracy, I'm happy to address the question of, where do we stand as far as provisions we are adding to the purchase and sale agreement. And let me say that we are right now not in an excused delay time. So as Yitz pointed out, we are in fact business as usual. We're in the office, we're safely doing closings. We happen to be doing them in the parking lot, but we're following safety measures. But we are putting some provisions into the current purchase and sale agreements that will deal with things like excused delays should we find ourselves in a situation. Fortunately, right now, the registries are open, so recordings are happening. We're able to do those electronically, as are most firms. The title insurance companies have addressed the issues with providing what's called gap coverage to allow us to close should the registries not stay open. We hear that movers are out there, banks are open, but we do want to have language in there for the what if, and we're all trying to decide what that should look like right now. So it's a bit of a work in progress, but the good news is that for the most part, we all play really nicely together, and I'm hoping that will continue. We've done so for many, many years, and I think it's going to have to be a situation where that continues, and people are going to have to be a little bit understanding. We're all trying to take the legal approach, but we also have to look at it from a human approach when we're in situations such as this.
Well, Amy, that like hits it on the head for how Tracy and I certainly feel, and we're trying to stress people that we're all in this together, and be human, and let's make it, let's work to do what we can together. I'm curious, and Yitz, I'll ask you, there's language that you as the attorneys are putting into the purchase and sale agreement, as Amy just mentioned, what should we as a realtor, as a buyer agent, be putting in the offer, or as a listing agent be seeking in the initial offer phase?
Before I address that, I want to echo what Amy said, and that this is a time where everybody should be working together. The beauty of real estate generally as an industry is that it's not adversarial. I've had many deals with Amy. It's never viewed as us against them. Everybody's trying to get to the same place. Buyers are trying to buy the property, sellers want the proceeds from that sale. Let's just get everybody there, but everybody needs to be protected. And as Amy pointed out, the what if, and we are working as an industry very closely. I'm on where both Amy and I are on a number of forums where conveyancers in our business are sharing this language information that Amy was alluding to make sure that it's fair for everybody. It does not have to be one-sided. Amy pointed out that there is the what if that's making its way into the purchase and sale. For the offer to purchase, I think that what if should also be in there as well, not in the same detail. My general approach to offers to purchase is I always tell real estate agents to operate under the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. And let the lawyers work out the details. I noticed just, it's either yesterday or the day before MAR, not to push any particular association, but the Mass Association of Realtors came out with a couple of forms, addendums that I think now should be attached to every single offer. One is dealing with the COVID-19 situation. Again, as Amy pointed out, it deals with the what if. The other major change, and that's coming down the pike, I'm sure you'll talk about it in more detail, is there's another rider that came out with dealing with how to obtain the smoke detector certificate. As Amy pointed out, it's movers are moving around. We can register, we can record documents at the registry. The only thing that's happening is how to get that smoke detector certificate, and there is a rider for that. I think those two riders alone should be enough for the offer to purchase. Again, no need to get into too much detail. Let the lawyers work that out, but it should be mentioned and addressed.
Well, Yitz, you just did a great lead in to our next question. Thank you.
Inadvertently.
So Amy, this one's for you. There's a lot that we need to do to get to the closing table. And a few of the big things are, you know, the smoke inspection, the final water, and also when there's septic involved, you know, sometimes there needs to be a Title V and sometimes there needs to be a new septic installed. How are you dealing with this and how is it kind of being written in?
Sure. Well, Yitz makes a good point that if the brokers can help us out by putting addendum like MAR has instituted and provided, it's really helpful for those to be in the offer, but then we'll take it from there. It's really important, particularly on this smoke inspection, to really pay attention to the actual language in the governor's order. And it's interesting to note that the governor, you know, this is so fluid that the governor came out with an order, and then I think it was maybe 24 or 48 hours later, the order was slightly revised to address some additional concerns that came up, and trying to, you know, listen and understand what changes might need to be made. So the governor's order right now is very, very specific. And so what we're doing is we're putting the exact language from the governor's order right into the purchase and sale agreement. And I think that's what most people are doing. You know, we have a number of deals with Yitz's office, and it just seems really the easiest thing to do since we don't want to be adversarial. Let's just use the language that's out there. There's three really important points to note from the governor's order. The first one is that the parties have to agree in writing to this. And so it does need to be in the purchase agreement. The parties have agreed to the new governor's order. The second thing that's important is that there's this language that says that immediately the buyer needs to make sure that there are smoke detectors in the home. So it doesn't relieve the parties of having the smoke detectors. It does shift some of the obligation over to the buyer to actually make sure they exist. So maybe upon the walkthrough or a few days before, they can make sure they're there. And we're seeing sellers being great. If they know they don't have enough equipment, they're going out and they're getting it installed so that, you know, the buyer's all set when they get in there. But that obligation now falls on the buyer. And then the third point that's super important is that after this emergency is lifted, it's incumbent upon the buyer to then get the smoke inspection done within 90 days. And that's the last piece. The change that the governor made to the order and what we're now seeing and what we're doing is that we're adding a small holdback to the purchase and sale agreement that says, look, seller, put a few $100s aside just in case there is some work that needs to be done to upgrade the smoke or the carbon monoxide detectors, so that the buyer doesn't get hit with that cost or the cost of the inspection, which in some towns it runs between $25 and $100 per town. So we are now adding this language that the seller will put a small holdback aside, and we really haven't gotten any pushback on that. And the last piece that isn't in the governor's order, but that everyone needs to be aware of, is you then need to get your lender on board. So you do need to then say to your lender, look, we're going to follow the governor's order. This is legal. You don't need the smoke. You're not doing anything wrong. But making sure that the lender is also on board and that they understand that we're closing under these new guidelines. So we don't want to skip that point with our borrowers and with our lenders. And a lot of lenders are ahead of this, and they're sending us guidance out there. And I'm sure Yitz's office is seeing it as well. You know, we're getting constant emails from the lenders as to what they will and won't allow us to do. So that's making it a little bit easier on us, but just don't want to skip that. As far as the water sewer goes, another thing that, you know, needs to happen before closing, if the town is closed, again, we're just using, you know, holdbacks. The one thing we are asking is that we see a current bill from the seller just to make sure they don't have thousands of dollars in back, you know, water bills or something like that, or some unusually high water bill. But again, a simple holdback agreement. Look, when we can get the water read, we'll take a picture of the gauge. And some cities and towns are letting us do that, send it into them, and they're just creating the water bill from that. So again, you know, this trusting, this working together. The towns are trying to work with us and you know, make that happen. So so we're doing that. And on the septic, so far, I haven't had any issues. Fortunately, a lot of people get ahead of that and get their inspections done. I imagine if the town is not working and will not come out and sign off, the Board of Health won't come out and sign off. We'll either have to delay a closing on that, or again, you know, holdbacks are a great tool that we have to make sure there's money for the buyer and that they can close. Again, the most important thing on that will be, you know, lender approval that they will allow us to go forward with the holdback.
So along those lines, I actually have a deal going on right now where there was a permit that never got closed out. And, you know, I think that your point, Amy, is that is well taken. Everyone's in this together. And if need be, you know, maybe there will be a holdback. It can get done after. But you know, what about something, Yitz, maybe you can answer this. When we're talking about new construction, you've got to get a lot of sign-offs, particularly a certificate of occupancy. Is it delayed closings, or is there a workaround for this?
I personally, I'd be curious what Amy has to say. I would be very, very hesitant to have a client close on new construction without a certificate of occupancy, not just permits closed out, but if they're closing out permits, they will also issue the certificate of occupancy. Those will go hand in hand. When I say very hesitant, that means I would suggest they don't close. Right. I would wait. There's no holdback. Well, if you think about a holdback, as Amy pointed out a number of times, there's a number of places and situations where holdbacks are a beautiful thing. They keep progress. They keep the deal moving forward. I just wouldn't know how much to hold back. And it's not a question of how much money we need to get the certificate of occupancy. It's a potential nightmare that won't be issued under any circumstance. Not very likely, but it's not a chance I would want a client to take. I'd be curious what Amy has to say.
If you give me a moment, I'll chime in on that, Jared.
Yeah, please.
So we have a couple of new construction transactions going on this week, and fortunately the towns have come out and done some final inspections for a certificate of occupancy, but I can't agree with Yitz more about that. The certificate of occupancy is one area where there's just no amount of money that you could come up with or be able to calculate that would allow you to close? And really, it's just one of those things that is going to have to push closings off if the towns aren't willing to come out. The cities and towns are working with us. They're trying to make other arrangements to get the COs done, the certificate of occupancy, and we are seeing that. The other thing that people need to be aware of, and probably the biggest problem that we're having, Yitz, is that our lenders just say absolutely no. You know,
Right.
They're being pretty flexible with us, but they're just not agreeing to let us close without a certificate of occupancy. And then you have the other issue that if you don't have a certificate of occupancy and you close and the town isn't on board with it and you move in, your client, your buyer client, could be facing a very large fine from the town for moving in without a certificate of occupancy. So there's so many issues that come from this that it's really one of those areas that we're going to have to work with the cities and towns. We're possibly going to have to push some closings out. And it's really, that's a little bit of a different animal.
I have to agree, if you don't mind me chiming in again. And there is, again, be curious what Amy has to say. There's one other situation where a holdback just is not appropriate, and that is if there's an open order of conditions on wetlands and we're waiting for a certificate of compliance. I've had nightmare situations in my career where years and years ago, we used to do a holdback, but I had a situation where it was couldn't get a certificate of compliance down the road. I even had a situation, this is crazy, but for a closing, the Conservation Commission told us there is a certificate of compliance. We have a copy of it here in our files, and they faxed it to us, and we relied on that. And it turns out where the certificate of compliance had been issued 2 years prior, it just was never recorded. And when the Conservation Commission went out to look at the property for whatever reason, after the closing had occurred, based on we relied on that certificate of compliance, they saw that the seller had made modifications since that certificate of compliance was issued, and now we have another problem. And of course, the buyers were none too happy. So holdbacks, I don't think do any good with a certificate of occupancy or a certificate of compliance. Otherwise, they are the magic elixir.
And I just want to chime in for a sec. Both of you, I love that you're adding on top of what each other's saying, and please don't ask permission to do that. We have both of you on here because you're both unbelievably valuable resources. So if we ask one of you a question, and the other one's wants to chime in, by all means, please do so. We appreciate everything you're each saying.
Thanks.
Sure. Well, Amy and I have a great relationship.
We do.
We have mutual respect, and we actually like each other.
And
That's
like
good.
Listen,
I
we
miss
really
that.
appreciate it, because I think, we can probably count on many hands how many times the two of us have called you guys, with questions for our clients. So we're very appreciative of the knowledge that you give us all. So kind of, moving on, you both kind of mentioned a little bit, about the mortgages. Amy, this one's for you. What happens, if the appraisers are no longer able to come out? Have they made any modifications? Or have there been issues with people that already had a loan commitment, with closings not then happening after that?
Yeah, so we're seeing that the appraisers can come out right now. They're following, protocol, wearing masks, gloves, all those kind of things. In some cases, a broker might, if it's like a final inspection for something, they might ask for a picture and not go to the property. They'll ask for the property to be vacant of other people. So the appraisers have been great partners during this situation. And so far, we're seeing them go forward. I personally haven't seen any banks revoke any commitments. What I have seen as of yesterday, and Yitz, I'll be very curious if you've seen this, is some of the lenders that we've worked with for many, many years, who would normally do a loan for someone who's putting 20% down, would do that loan, are now not doing that loan unless someone puts 25% down. So some of we have very long-term relationships with are now going to what's called a 75% LTV limit, which means if you're not willing to put 25% down, they're not going to do the loan. We haven't seen that retroactive. In other words, if someone was approved already, they're not pulling the loan. I'm in touch with, those banks, and they've been, again, everyone's partnering here, everyone's working together. But we have heard that going forward, at least for the short term, they're required more down as part of the mortgage process. So the other thing I will mention is that we unfortunately have seen, a couple of folks get denied who might not otherwise have gotten denied, and that's unfortunate. And we're trying to work through that with, in other ways.
So you've brought us through, we've talked through the offer, we've talked through the purchase and sale agreement, we've talked through the inspections, the appraisals, the permits, all of that. So now we are getting to the closing. And Amy, you said you're doing some closings in your parking lot. Yitz, how are you guys handling closings? What's going on with the registries? Do buyers and sellers, who's going to the closings? Can there be anything without wet signatures? What's the latest on that?
Okay, there's a lot of parts to that question, so let me try to address it one at a time. First of all, in terms of the closing itself, I love the idea of the parking lot. There's no question about it. The one thing we've instituted, we always prided ourselves on also being service oriented. And if closings needed to take place at somebody else's office or on a refinance at the borrower's home, while it's not our favorite thing to do, but we would do that, that's done. There's a new normal. We will not do closings out of our office. We won't even go to the lender's office, the bank, because we can't control that environment. We can control our environment. And we've taken a number of precautions, including, I'm sure a lot of people have done this. Number one, only signers are able to come to a closing, to answer one part of your question. No children, no grandparents, no offense, but no real estate agents, no lenders, just the signers, period. And we will screen them prior, a couple days before, with the typical questions, any symptoms, have you traveled in the last 14 days, etc. Once everybody passes that, we will do the closing here. But if there's any issues, I have no problem. I've told the lawyers here, for their safety, we have glass windows in our office. Let them sign outside. Let them sign in their car. I really don't care. We'll just look through the glass. The only thing I would appreciate is if when it comes time to sign the mortgage, the note, anything that needs to be witnessed or notarized, that they come a little closer and do it literally at the window. It's analogous to me doing in the parking lot. Same thing. That's appropriate. It's a new world. Get that done. The one thing that is coming down the pike, I think I'd be curious again what Amy has to say. I don't think it's a question of if. I think it's a question of when. There's an emergency order sitting in front of the governor to allow Amy and myself and people in our industry to use rudimentary FaceTime, Zoom, just like we're doing, to do a closing. And it has we don't need to get into the details of how to notarize and things of that nature, but that is going to be coming down the pike. It'll be temporary, and it'll have a number of constraints, but the concept is to do no face-to-face closing. I personally believe we're still a few years away, but some places in the country are already doing complete remote online notarization. My guess is that'll happen in Massachusetts as the rest of the country goes at some point. But for this emergency, there is this legislation that would allow for that. Let's assume for a second, to answer the last part of your question, somehow we get the documents signed. We still do need wet signatures, by the way. That was one of your components of your question. It's just how to accomplish that. We can try to do that electronically, you know, through, again, FaceTime, if this bill passes. I believe it will pass, but I don't know if it'll be today, tomorrow, next week, hopefully very soon. It just passed, I believe, yesterday in New Hampshire, a similar bill, and New York. It's only logic that will follow suit. As far as the registry goes, as Amy talked about earlier, it's business as usual. The registries are open on a limited basis. For instance, no more closings in the registry. Public's not allowed in the registry. Not even all the registry workers are allowed to work in the registry. They're on a very small skeleton crew. But one of the employees there is their sole purpose is to take these electronic recordings that Amy talked about. We can now record documents electronically. We always had that capability. There's reasons why some people always took advantage of it and other people didn't. Again, that could be a topic for a whole nother podcast. But suffice it to say, we are able to do that, and we are doing that. And so it's business as usual. Go to record, here's your keys, everything's fine. And again, as Amy pointed out earlier, we've even gone a little farther in the event that the registry completely shuts down. Not even those essential workers are allowed there. We can still close without going to record at all under this, what Amy alluded to as gap insurance. Title insurance companies are on board. Again, not to get into any details, that has certain limitations, not limitations on closing, it's a limitation on what needs to be done to accomplish that. So certainly we've covered, the industry has covered every eventuality to make sure your deals end up being consummated on somehow, whether it's literally on record or figuratively on record.
Yeah, I think it's important to note what Yitz said also is that, you know, the registries are open for this e-recording. We are experiencing some delays. I'm not sure if you are too, Yitz, but
yes,
getting our title exams done, that is slowing us down because, you know, the title examiners can't get into the registry all the time to do the work they need to do to finish the title exams. That's sort of an ancillary piece, but of course an incredibly important piece to getting us to closing. So we're starting to see them be a little hand-tied on that one, and it's slowing them down. So we're waiting to see how that plays out, but again, we're staying in touch with them. Again, it's everybody's safety here, and we all hope this legislation passes. I will say, you know, on the other coin of it, you know, we want it to be a temporary order. We don't want this to be something long-term, as I can see that Yitz is agreeing with me wholeheartedly. You know, if, you know, as other states do, they, you know, don't use attorneys and they just use these remote notaries. So what we're really looking for in this legislation, and what's important, is that it's going to be A, a temporary measure, and B, more like FaceTime or Zoom or something like that, versus, you know, one of these online notary companies, which would change the whole industry presumably down the road. So we're walking a little bit of a fine line there, I think, right? Yeah. So
yes, absolutely.
We want to be careful what we want to be careful what we wish for on this one.
Well, I think that you know, I think the one thing that is nice to see, that it seems that everyone's trying to collaborate and get to the same, you know, get to the closing table basically. And it's nice to see that all the different parts of the transaction are working together.